Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the Synthesis webcast series. My name is Eric Kavanaugh. I'll be your host for today's web seminar. It's a big one, folks. We're going to talk all about metadata management, from metadata muddle to metadata magic, a big step for modernization. Metadata mastery is what we're talking about. And very quickly, just some housekeeping notes and a bit of an overview, folks. If you do not have some form of dynamic metadata management in your organization today, odds are you're going to have a lot of trouble going forward. There are just too many data sources. There are too many business needs out there. And the situation has become so complex and so unwieldy that you really need some kind of technology to dynamically crawl around your information landscape and ascertain what it is that you have out there and really help you piece it all together. And if you don't have that, the bottom line is you really have more of a piecemeal type approach, and you're not going to have governance. You're going to have data quality problems. You're going to have access problems. You're going to have all kinds of issues. So the good news is that is all changing. We're going to learn about that today. We're going to hear from my good friend Dave Wells, who is frankly one of the best in the business. And we're also going to hear from Amnon Drori of a company called Octopi, which is doing some very, very interesting stuff in this space, calling all the way from Israel, as a matter of fact. We do archive all these webinars for later viewing, so if you miss something, fear not. We'll have it up for you usually by tomorrow, a day later. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dave Wells to take it away. Tell us all about a big step for BI modernization.
Thank you, Eric. I think this really is a big deal, and I have to say I was quite impressed when I got a look at Octopi and what Amnon had to show me. I've been involved in data management for many years. First got involved in data warehousing in the early 90s, and throughout all of these years, all of these decades, we've struggled with metadata, and there have been a few attempts along the way to try to standardize metadata. Does anyone remember the Common Warehouse Meta Model? The Object Management Group put a lot of time and energy into creating CWM, and it was only very lightly adopted, and we still struggled with metadata. So through the years of data warehousing and BI, we created this thing that I think of as the metadata muddle. And the reason it's a muddle is because we have just a bit of metadata everywhere and nothing that brings it all together and nothing that manages it. So while we were integrating data in the age of data warehousing, we were disintegrating metadata. So this is kind of the technology myth about legacy BI, that we bring data in from all of our various sources through ETL processes. We load it into a data warehouse, and from there we produce reports, dashboards, scorecards, support OLAP cubes, and so on. And the pieces, the ETL and the database and the analytics and the reporting, they all fit together neatly. That's the story that we're led to believe. But the reality looks a little bit more like this. ETL lives in its little pocket of activity. Databases work with their pocket of activity. The output side, the analysis, the reporting, they have their pockets of activity, and each one maintains their own metadata. And there is not much in the way of connectivity between the ETL metadata and the database metadata, the database metadata and the reporting metadata, and so on. So when someone needs to understand what data do we have, where does it come from, how did it get here, what transformations have been applied, what is the business meaning of it, anything that we would go to metadata to understand, we have multiple places that we need to look. And we sometimes have overlapping, redundant metadata. We sometimes have conflicting metadata telling different stories. So we've encountered the same problem with metadata that we set out to resolve with data integration in the age of data warehousing. It's further compounded this way. Not only do I have ETL tools with metadata that is separate from database metadata, that is again separate from BI and analysis tool metadata, but we tend to have multiple tools. I may have some metadata for ETL in Informatica Power Center and other metadata for ETL In SSIS, I may have some database metadata in Teradata and other database metadata in Oracle. I might have some reporting metadata in Cognos and other reporting metadata in MicroStrategy. So trying to get a complete picture of what's going on with my data is just really difficult, really horrendous, really terrible to try to accomplish. And the reality is this has become more critical than ever because our data management world is becoming increasingly complex. It's no longer simply data warehouse. It tends to be multiple data warehouses, and it tends to be multiple data warehouses and data lakes and so many other things that every organization today is trying to confront modernization. How do I modernize my data management systems? And how are we going to do that without having the metadata to know what we have and how it flows and what the data pipelines look like? So I have this fragmented metadata. I have source, schema, definitions, and source to target mappings, multiples of them in different places. I have warehouse data inventories. I have definitions. I have database schema, multiples of them in different places. And similarly, I have analysis workbooks. How many Tableau workbooks do I have out there? How many of them are redundant and are sort of replicating the problem of redundant Excel spreadsheets? Where do I have all my business definitions? So trying to understand the landscape of data that we have and how it is currently managed is a first step to being able to modernize. And without bringing the metadata together, without being able to consolidate metadata and get one big picture view of all of the data that we're managing, modernization just becomes really tremendously difficult. We compound the problem because most of us don't have one data warehouse. I run live polls when I'm speaking, and I ask people, how many data warehouses do you have? And you can see the typical responses that I get here. Some people say none. I have no data warehouses, very few. Less than 10% say 0 or 1. More than 60% say they have between 2 and 5 data warehouses. That means somewhere around 30%, close to 30%, are running 6 or more data warehouses. Now think about how this compounds itself. If I have multiple data warehouses, each has its own metadata. If I have metadata separated between ETL tools, databases, and reporting tools, each has its own metadata. If I have multiple reporting tools, that compounds it. If I have multiple databases, that compounds it. So a simple illustration here on the right side of the slide. Assume that your organization has 4 data warehouses that are a result of mergers and acquisitions. You have 3 different ETL tools used across those 4 data warehouses. You have 2 data warehouses in SQL Server, 1 in Teradata, and 1 in Oracle. Various ways of getting the data reported and analyzed include Cognos, Business Objects, SSRS, Power BI, and Tableau, used in different combinations across all of those 4 warehouses. How many pockets of disparate metadata does this mean? If I have 4 data warehouses times 3 ETL tools times 3 database management systems times 5 reporting and analysis tools, I have potentially 180 different pockets of metadata that might exist. Now, how realistic is it that I can tackle 180 separate pockets of metadata and really understand my data landscape enough to modernize effectively? That's the challenge we have here. We really do need to modernize. I haven't encountered a single organization out there in all of my speaking, my teaching, and my consulting that isn't struggling with the question of modernization. And the reasons we need to modernize are all of the stuff that's gone on in the past decade or slightly more that has changed the landscape of data management. It's something that I refer to sometimes as the data quake. The shakeup in data management disrupted the foundation of how we manage data, just like an earthquake disrupts the foundations of the things we build on the surface of the earth. So we've had shakeups with big data. We've had shakeups with NoSQL. We've had shakeups with cloud. We've had shakeups with data lakes. We've had shakeups with the ways that we need to organize data for AI and machine learning. So all of these things have changed our world. The old world of legacy BI, the simple world on the left, is pretty simple and straightforward. A handful of sources, all relational tables, fairly easy to manage. Our processing is primarily ETL, and our deployment is almost always on premises. If I shift to the world of modern BI and analytics, it's a much more complex thing. I have far more sources. I have unstructured data. I have differently structured data. I have high volumes of data. I have streaming data. I have the need to converge my streaming data with my batch data so that it can't be just a streaming engine alone that handles it. Then I have different kinds of processing. I still have ETL, but I also do data replication. I have data ingestion. I have data refinement processes. And I have more ways that I use the data, not just reporting and dashboards and scorecards and OLAP, but AI, machine learning, advanced analytics, data science kinds of applications. My processors still include ETL, but I also have Hadoop, MapReduce, Storm, Spark, Flink, Kafka, etc., all sorts of processor technologies, each consuming data, each producing metadata. And I have multiple deployment platforms, on-premises, cloud, multi-cloud, on-prem and cloud hybrids. So you can see the complexity of the world that we work with today. We need to modernize. We need to be able to step up to this modern world. And we're not going to be able to do it effectively if we don't have good knowledge of the data that we're managing. And all of that good knowledge, every bit of that good knowledge, comes from metadata. So let's just touch quickly on a few different kinds of modernization projects. One that you see top left here is cloud migration. I encounter this quite frequently where people want to migrate existing data warehouses to the cloud. And the challenge of migrating existing data warehouses to the cloud is most folks start out thinking about it as I need to move the data. Yes, you need to move the data. You also need to move the schema. You also need to reconnect the applications. You sometimes will need to rewire your data pipelines, remake your ETL. So knowing what data to move, how, in what sequence, with what schema, with what metadata, all of that depends on knowing the data in that existing data warehouse and thinking about how it's moved and how it's processed and how you're going to organize to get it ready to move everything to the cloud, not just move the data to the cloud. Knowledge of the data you have in that existing data warehouse is absolutely critical, so you've got to bring the metadata together. Bottom left, a very common scenario I see is the desire to migrate to self-service. So this picture shows a data warehouse where the data is consumed exclusively by Cognos for reporting, dashboards, scorecards, OLAP. And now we want to migrate to a world where Cognos continues to support OLAP, but everything else can be done through Tableau and let us put the consumption of data in the hands of the business people. Once again, we can't do this migration. We can't do the connection to Tableau. We can't manage and govern and understand the implications of moving to self-service unless we have the metadata to understand what it is that we're exposing through self-service, where is their privacy-sensitive data, where is their security-sensitive data, how do we need to think about the nature of this data in terms of governing it in a self-service world. And that, again, is metadata dependent. One that I encounter very frequently on the right side of the slide is a desire to update the data management architecture. And this comes in many, many different flavors. How do I get my data warehouse or data warehouses and my data lake to coexist and complement one another and not just be separate silos of data? Do I move the data warehouse inside the data lake? Do I place the data warehouse beside the data lake? Does the data lake become staging area for the data warehouse? So many variations on how we can modernize this way that we can no longer continue to move down the data lake path and eventually the data fabric and the data hub path by patching things onto an old batch-oriented data warehousing architecture. So many companies now are saying we can't band-aid things onto an old architecture anymore. We need to step back and rethink and re-architect from the ground up. How are we going to do this without knowing and understanding the data that we are currently managing? So once again, a big metadata dependency. Another one that I see is the desire to consolidate multiple data warehouses as they migrate to the cloud. This is just data warehouse cloud migration with the added complexity of having multiple data warehouses and wanting to be able to integrate them and bring them together as we migrate to the cloud. So I have all of the issues of cloud migration, plus all of the questions of integrating, mapping multiple data warehouses to one another, and understanding where there's data redundancy among these multiple data warehouses, understanding where there's data disparity and inconsistency among all of these data warehouses, and being able to fully understand the data in all of the warehouses in such a way that I can integrate at the same time I migrate. A big challenge, one that can't be overcome without good, sound, comprehensive metadata and the ability to understand what it is I have, what it is I'm migrating. And then the final one that I see frequently, and I sometimes try to discourage and say take one step at a time, but often it's not practical to take one step at a time, is to update the architecture and migrate to the cloud simultaneously. Okay. And based on what we've discussed so far, you can certainly see the complexities in that. I must understand the data that I have. I must understand the architecture that I have. I must understand my data pipelines. I must understand where the data is currently stored. I must know how to migrate schema to the cloud as well as migrating data to the cloud. I need to know the applications. I need to know the users. I need to know the data volumes. There is so much that I need to know to pull off this kind of a big shift in data management that it just isn't practical to tackle it without metadata. So metadata is fundamental to each and every one of these data management modernization projects. And data management modernization is fundamental to being able to step into the age of AI, analytics, data science. So here's what we have today. We have data management in some current state. It may be simple legacy data warehouses, it may be data warehouse and data lake, but they're siloed. And we have some desired state, a place we want to get to in modernization. And in the middle, we have this mess of metadata, this thing that I call the metadata model, that is the biggest single barrier to modernization. Simply knowing what we have and how it works is a huge challenge for modernization. It's further compounded by the fact that many of the people, the generation who built these legacy data warehouses, have since retired or moved on, so we don't really even have the tribal knowledge to depend on. Metadata is the only real place we have to turn to be able to understand this. And the challenge is trying to pull all of this metadata together and reconcile it in a way that can really make sense to us. So what do we need to do this, to do it well, and to do it right? We need to get rid of the metadata model. We need to be able to, in an automated fashion, with metadata automation, go out and crawl all of those BI tools, all of those database tools, all of those ETL tools, and collect the metadata. We need to be able to bring the metadata from all of these various pockets together and store it in one repository. We need to be able to index it so that we can navigate through this metadata, so that we can search it, so that we can understand what we have in this new singular metadata repository. And we need to begin to see the connections between metadata from different pockets of our legacy work. We need to be able to search metadata. It needs to be fast. It needs to be efficient. We need to be able to trace the lineage of data And to do that, some of it comes from the ETL tools, some of it comes from the database tools, some of it comes from the consumption tools. So seeing the connections and connecting the dots and then being able to visualize data lineage and to see entire data pipelines from source to consumer becomes really important. We need to be able to look at it at a high level, see it as summary, and drill into detail when we need to explore the details. We need to be able to export this metadata so that we can use it for other things and apply it in other ways outside of the metadata repository. And one of the ones that I think is a big one is when we bring this metadata together, now we have the right stuff to populate a data catalog. If we can inject this stuff into a data catalog, we've really stepped up data management, stepped up metadata management, and done a tremendous step forward in enabling self-service. So metadata automation, in my mind, is one of the single most important things we can bring into play if we want to really step up to the world of modern data management. So that's the story of why I believe metadata is critical to data management modernization. If data management modernization is critical to analytics, to data science, to digital transformation, then metadata automation is critical to those three things too. With that, I will pass back to Eric.
Yeah, and real quick, I'll just throw a couple comments here, Dave. Number one, I think you're spot on. And number two, I feel like if a company does not have, as I suggested at the top of the hour, some kind of dynamic metadata management technology, really they're just going to have to kind of scrap a lot of what they have already if they're going to move to the cloud, right? Because you're just not going to be able to pull that off, right?
Yeah, they're either going to scrap it or they're going to fake it. They're going to work with what information they do have, and I've seen this many times where you make assumptions, and then when those assumptions turn out to be bad, you try to fix it after the fact.
Fake it till you bake it, right? That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I forgot about that rather significant option, right? Just fake it. Just pretend.
Yeah.
Who will know? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and you make a good point, too, about digital transformation, which, let's face it, very often is going to involve moving to the cloud, right? I mean, not always, but I think digital transformation will largely involve some kind of cloud service. So you're going to have to be porting some flow of data up through the cloud environment. Again, that's going to be driven by metadata. And once again, if you don't have some dynamic capability for determining what you have, aligning what you have, and then leveraging in a responsible way what you have, that's not going to take place. And by the way, there's that whole thing, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and all of these subsequent rules and regulations that are coming in its wake, like the California privacy law. I've heard some other states are mulling these things right now. Our Congress, realistically, are they going to tackle that? I don't really see it happening, but nonetheless, these are straws in the wind. Well, let's bring on Amnon Drori to kind of help us understand how we can save ourselves from the impending disaster of metadata complexity and muddle. Amnon, I've handed the keys over to you, so I think you wanted to share your screen. If you would go ahead and do that. Are you
yes,
out there, Amnon?
I'm doing this right now.
Excellent. There we go.
So can you see my screen?
Yep, I see it. Looks good.
Beautiful. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Dave, for this presentation. I think just a quick recap about all the promises that you just shared with everybody. I'll try to keep up with them. You talked about fast and easy, the ability to kind of manage metadata in a very easy and fast way. You talked about automation. You talked about cross-platform, meaning gathering different type of metadata from different systems of different vendors, so we can see a big picture at one screen rather than so many different tools, about 180 different pockets. You talked about collaborative between the different stakeholders. You talked about keeping this dynamic, which means that every time that the organization changes metadata, always you want to be able to enable metadata up to date. And then you talked about the cloud and being scalable, so there's a lot of promises. And that's fine. I'll try to deal with that today. and show you the power of all of this modernization, something that we did in our company. Just to share it, everybody, Octopi is about 4 years old company. Our origin started from leading business intelligence groups in companies like insurance and banking and telecom companies. And one of the things that we've noticed is the anomaly of the amount of data consumers that are consuming data, like unbelievable growth. We saw anomaly about the ability to manage so many different business intelligence tools that have started to being implemented, just in the example of what Dave showed. And the anomaly had to do with the inability to grow the number of people in the team. As a matter of fact, it didn't really matter how many people we added to the team. We were always late. We were always behind delivering what the business needed: accessibility, trusting the data, and respond every time that it was critical to understand if the data can be trusted. In other words, one capability called the lineage from report to the source. One of the things that we see in our company, and we were kind of born to the cloud, is that more and more companies are modernizing themselves by managing the metadata, yet not the data, managing the metadata on the cloud. So you can see really big companies that we work with, like insurance and healthcare and governments and utilities and manufacturing, that are shipping metadata to the cloud and enable managing that metadata, because it's just metadata, not data, on the cloud to leverage its scalability, its elasticity, and so on and so forth. But more and more we see companies that are even looking to move the BI systems as itself to the cloud, not only manage the metadata there, but running those systems on the cloud. You can see modernization coming from Microsoft and Amazon and Google. And it seems to be that a lot of companies understand the power of the cloud on one hand, but on the other hand, they don't want to keep managing those systems on-premise because it's just more and more headache exponentially growing. So why not enjoy the power and scalability on the cloud? And this is what we wanted to do, because if you look at a typical environment, and this is kind of a visual way that represents most of our customers. On the left-hand side, you can see a lot of the data sources or where the data reside, but that data has to be shipped to the other side of the screen, which you don't see them by the hundreds, if not the thousands, of data consumers that consume data and want to be able to look at the data and get insight. And in today's world, still, most of the data runs through the business intelligence. So combining this complexity of all the different systems that participate in the different steps of the data movement process from different vendors on the cloud, you need to be able to handle all the immense amount of metadata in one place without worrying should you or could you understand the metadata in each one of these systems, or even use silo-based metadata management tools for each one of these vendors. As a matter of fact, we run and we work with many organizations that they have decided not to invest in maintaining metadata rather than getting insights of the metadata. In order to do that, you need to free yourself from the infrastructure management of the data. And this is why we kind of established Octopi. One of the biggest, I would say, things that you can see is understand the data movement process, as you know, as lineage, either from the report back to the ETL process to the data source, or the other way around. I'm going to show you this in just a sec. Two use cases that are popularly, we see them within our customers. So you want to be able to manage your metadata. You want to be able to manage the metadata regardless to which system you have. You want to be able to manage the metadata in a single repository with as less effort as needed, or as even zero IT capital to be able to manage all of that. And this is what we done. This is what I'm going to show you here. A product that is based on the cloud, that the only thing the customer needs to do is invest 30 minutes of their time extracting the metadata. And if you don't want to do it yourself, there are very special extractors that have been created to do that for you automatically. And after running this extractor, within 30 minutes, you have extractions of the metadata for as many systems that you have, as you want. We have customers who use Occupy for 4 to 5 BI systems, and we have customers who are using it for 30 and 40 different BI systems. Once the metadata is centralized, then within 48 hours, you get an access and start working with the product, just like I'm going to show you in a second. So what you see in front of you is our demo environment that shows a collection of data that had been extracted centralized from a variety of different systems. Some of them you can see here, and to make it automatic, you can just schedule how often would you like the extractors to extract the metadata from those BI systems. You can see 410 ETL processes. They are shipping data on about 1,900 database tables and views. They are being consumed by 26 reports. You can see a variety of different vendors, and here's the use case. This is kind of by far the number one use case that we see our customers using Occupy, replacing the manual work that they do today. So the business user calls up and say, I'm looking at a report called customer products, but for some reason, the report is suspicious. Could you check if the data can be trusted? Could you check if the data is accurate? Could you check how the data landed on that report? In the BI language, it means I need to understand this report. I need to know where it's being generated. I need to understand its structure. I need to understand which are the exact database tables and views and associated named ETL processes in this collective metadata are collectively shipping data that lands in that report. Now, obviously, you can do it manually, but here's a way to do this in 5 seconds. So the only thing you need to do is to go to this search bar here or to here and just ask to see the report. So I'm going to go to the top here. I'm going to ask to find the report called customer products. So as I'm typing in, I already found 2 reports carrying that exact name. Here's the report I was looking at, and I'm going to click the button called Lineage. I'm clicking it right now. There it is. Within about 3 seconds, you find the following picture. This report right here is based on a view that is built on 3 database tables and 4 ETL processes. If you want to drill in, you can see, for example, this view. You can see the name of the view. You can see the body of the view. And if you are a regulator or just want to have a recording or capturing of the movement process, you can capture this on a visualization generated on the fly. But also you can get information about the report. You can access the report from here, and you can see where these exact name database tables are coming from, as well as the ETL. This specific lineage, our prospect share, they took them about 10 days to generate. The reason was that they came late finding out that this ETL is generated in Informatica and this one is in SSIS. So understanding reverse lineage from the report all the way back is something that we see our customers do this quite often. Often means dozens of times on a weekly basis. But this is just one side of the use case. The other side of the use case is exactly the opposite. What if you want to do changes in this ETL because this business user asked to ship more data to that report? So now that I found all of these associated ETL processes for that report, I want to update this report, this ETL. But I need to do 2 things. I need to understand all the implications, the impact analysis in advance when doing something to that ETL so I can test it properly before going live, and then in the future avoid that use case of a business user calling me up. What I would do here is just right-click here, click the lineage, and now see what happens. This is the picture that you get. With 3 seconds, you are able to understand that this ETL, or whatever I'm going to do to that ETL, impacts not only this report that we started their journey, it impacts all of these reports. And guess what? If you remember, this one was generated in SSRS. Well, this one this one, or this one, is in Power BI, where this one can be in Cognos. Going back to Dave's example, it can be 3 different systems, 3 different users looking at different reports. From the BI perspective, I would never have a clue that all of these 3 different users using different systems, different reports, are going to be impacted by that without doing this lineage. The last thing I want to show you is that what you see here is what we call horizontal lineage, which means between systems. What if you want to dive in to the inner lineage, to what we call the vertical lineage, to the column level? And again, you don't want to invest in doing this manually. So let's take this example. You can see that this ETL actually ships data to 4 database tables. Let's see the maps inside that are associated to that ETL. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to dive again to another layer, which is the container. Here are the 4 maps that ship data to these tables, and let's do this magic by drilling into the map view and see the vertical lineage column to column. And you can track each field from the source as it transforms all the way to the destination, which is the table itself. And you can actually map this just with a click of a button on the fly when you need it by anyone within your team. The last thing I want to show you about that is this is just one type of a visualization to the analyzed metadata that we do. The other type of visualization that is highly being used is when you want to find certain data elements or calculation of fields, or in the regulated environment in the GDPR when you needed to find a field because you wanted to mask it. Probably you would use discovery. In this case, if you find a certain data element right here, you would just click search, and as we promised, on the left-hand side you can see all the systems that participate in the different steps of the data movement process by different vendors, all in one screen, and the green button represents how many times we have found that specific item that you were looking for in the language that is related to that specific vendor. So if you're using SSIS and you want to see the SQL command, you just drill and you can see the SQL statement already edited and analyzed by Octopi. So in short, we analyze metadata from a variety of different business intelligence tools in order to produce products. One product is the data lineage. The other product is the data discovery. One of the greatest benefits of using Octopi as a standalone product, but is also to collaborate the analyzed metadata that we do to enrich other apps. I think that Dave mentioned products like data governance or data catalog. And from what we've seen, data catalog are less extracting and analyzing metadata from either ETL or reporting systems. And we can easily export or enrich or analyze metadata that had been gathered automatically from so many other systems into data governance or data catalog products. Case in point, IBM, Calibra, Relation, and so many other tools. So if you are planning to use data catalog, or you are using such, or data governance, you want to enrich that with more metadata and also collaborate that with lineage, Octopi can be a great solution for you. So that's it for me at this point. I try to be very efficient, so if you'd like to have a more personalized demo or tackle your specific use cases, we'll be more than happy to do that, or even perform a free trial for
Nand, if you would leave your demo up there while we go through the Q&A here, because I love to kind of dive into some of what you've been showing there. I mean, this, for example. So I'll bring Dave Wells back into the picture here. You know, historically, before we had technologies like this, you had to do a lot of manual mapping, and you would kind of draw out where things were going, and these would be sort of separate, offline, if you will, representations of what was going on. Or sometimes they were they were directly resulting from the technologies that you use, the images, the graphics, et cetera, but nothing to this level of detail would give you that clear a visual representation of what's going on under the covers. And to me, that's a really, really big deal. You still need people to work with these systems. It still needs individuals who understand the domain to spend time piecing things together, but at least you can see what you're doing in a very visually compelling way. Is that about right, Dave?
That's absolutely right. I think there's four big things here. One is the level of detail. You can't get this detailed when you do it manually. Another is that it's time-consuming to do it manually. The third thing is that manually mapping all of this is error-prone. You are sure to miss something.
That's
and maybe
right.
the biggest one is because it's time-consuming, it's likely to be out of date by the time you finish because something will have changed in an area that you've already worked. So, yeah, manual just is not practical for so many reasons that an automated tool is, I think, just the obvious way to step up to this problem.
Yeah, and Amnon, I actually learned something about you guys today when you mentioned that you got your start working with large organizations in a consultative fashion. Is that right? So you folks saw the challenges up close and personal and realized something had to be done. And that's, from my experience, very often where you see these kinds of technologies emanate, meaning you have people on the front lines working with large organizations trying to tackle these challenges, and they realize we need some kind of tool to do this. And so I think that's a pretty compelling part of your story right there. Can you just talk briefly about that again, how it was these real-world experiences that you folks had working with large organizations that resulted in the design and the production of this tool?
Yes, I think you kind of nailed kind of hit the nail on the head, because I think that what we experience is the market is a little bit confused. They think that data catalog and data governance and metadata management, data lineage are all the same. As a matter of fact, they're not. What we're doing with metadata is analyzing for purposes and use cases, just like some of which I showed today. And some of the use cases are happening like every day, literally every day. But some of the metadata that we analyze can be also used for other purposes like data catalog and data governance. One of the things that you just mentioned is also the ability in a dynamic environment to be up to date. Bear in mind that, for example, the metadata that you see right here can be a snapshot of the metadata that exists in the company, but due to constant changes, deleting table, changing a field, adding report, deleting report, modifying reports, and so many things are happening as the business keeps changing all the time, you need the metadata to be up to date. Now, if you've done this once manually, well, I can only feel sorry for the time that has been lost. But how would you keep doing this manually? It's a nightmare. And this is why a lot of companies are stuck. When we look back at our companies or our customers, they leverage automation, they kind of forget that there's something there watching for them about the latest metadata and the accuracy of the data movement process, and this is just 5 seconds away.
Yeah, because you're scanning the system, you're scanning the network, and we're having a bunch of good questions come in now from the attendees, so I'm going to throw some of them over your way. But the key is that you're scanning the entire environment. Does it go all the way down to a mainframe environment? Can you actually see into a mainframe world?
So the answer is, I will go back here to answer the question. We do not analyze the data sources, not because of technological limitation, very much because we've seen that 80 to 85% of the data that any company uses runs through the ETL processes. So any information from any source that runs into a business process, yeah, we can do that. But we do not perform metadata extraction and analysis specifically on the apps. We didn't see any value in that.
That's it. So basically you're just monitoring the highways is what it boils down to, right?
Yeah, if there's data from the mainframe or AS400 or SAP1, SAP HANA or whatever, that runs through the ETL, we capture this at that point. So we can track it all the way to the report.
Yeah. That's really good stuff, because what's getting moved around is getting used. And I guess, Dave, I'll throw that over to you.
Correct.
This is one really good way to understand what's happening in your organization. If it's moving somewhere, then someone is using it, and you want to understand who's using it, what are they using, what's the complete picture here, and that's what you're getting with this particular technology, right, Dave?
That's a big part of what you're getting with this particular technology. You are getting who's using it, where's it being used, but you're also getting all of the data lineage. So not only who's using it, but where is it coming from. And maybe the biggest thing you're getting of great and lasting value is the dependencies. Like Amnon showed earlier, the one ETL process considering modifying it, and then seeing all of the other places that ETL process touched besides the one report that it originally focused on. So that impact analysis, that awareness that this is a complex system and you can't make changes with blinders. You have to be able to see the big picture, and it's just not practical with manual metadata reconciliation to get a complete, accurate, detailed, big picture view.
Well, and this kind of gets back to one of the major sources of data quality issues in boardrooms and office complexes all over the world, right? Is that you have people in good faith trying to get to the truth, trying to understand what their data means, and they're making changes. Let's say they reach out to the ETL team and say, hey, I want to make this transformation to make my life a little bit easier, to get a more clear view, but hitherto, you wouldn't know how or if that would impact somebody else. And someone else who was impacted would have to be paying attention to know, to actually do an apples-to-apples comparison. Now, wait a minute, why is this number off? Is it because we made more sales, or is it because someone changed some ETL script somewhere? I mean, up until this point, it seems to me that was kind of a big, nasty, black, complex box through which all this data was moving around. I mean, I recall asking a question of that nature from someone from Informatica like 9 or 8 years ago on DM radio, and they kind of said, yeah, well, that's true. It's just hard to see in there. So now that we can see it, I mean, I guess, Dave, I'll throw this one over to you. With a technology like this, you can start better understanding all the different assets that you have, all the reporting that's going on, everything that's moving around. And to me, that, of course, helps quality. It, of course, allows you to start moving in the direction of actual data governance, which I think is kind of a thing, meaning people say they're doing data governance, but unless you can see this level of detail, you really can't. You're just not able to perform that. But also, I think it's going to help us, as you suggested, migrate to the cloud, because you're going to understand what you have to move, what those dependencies are. And I think you're going to get from good analysts, and again, you need people to work with this technology. From the good analysts, you're going to get better ideas about how to streamline your systems and kind of pare them down a little bit over time, right?
Right, exactly. I guess the analogy I'd use is if we tried to manage corporate finance without financial data, just imagine the mess we'd be in. If we tried to manage corporate finance, but we didn't have connections between general ledgers, budgets, purchasing, payables, if we couldn't connect all the dots in finance and everything was siloed, we'd have a mess. Well, that's what we're trying to do today with data management that's becoming increasingly complex, is we're trying to manage this complex data management world with pockets of data here and there that are not connected. So, yes, cloud migration is important, modernization is important, impact analysis when making any change is important, and knowing who's using which data for what purposes is especially important when you try to bring together two things that are sort of inherently at odds. One is self-service, and the other is data governance.
That's right. You need those guardrails. And, it seems to me this whole NoSQL movement really transformed. I mean, you kind of talked about this in your data quake slide, right, the sudden prevalence of NoSQL technologies, of big data technologies, growing up very rapidly all around us, I think threw a significant curveball at this entire environment and really makes this mandatory these days going forward. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think the other thing that NoSQL did, if we flash back to 1970-something and Ted Cog, the big thing Ted Cog gave us with his approach to relational data was he took knowledge of data out of program code and put it in the database. And that was one way that we could be safe and comfortable with metadata for an extended period of time. And then NoSQL came along, and what happened was knowledge of data was no longer in the database. It's back in the code. It's in Java code. It's in MapReduce code. It's in various forms of code. This raises the stakes on metadata. When we're dealing with NoSQL data, we can't go to database schema and find qualifiers like this field must be unique, this field is constrained to these values. We can't get the knowledge of the data out of database schema. So that really truly raises the stakes on metadata. So yeah, NoSQL is one of the really big game changers.
And is that your impression too, Amnon, that the NoSQL movement kind of created an additional force of pressure on these information landscapes and is really forcing organizations to rethink how they're doing things and to explore some new approaches?
Correct. I could not agree more. I think that one of the things that we see that more kind of companies want to analyze data and metadata from kind of what you have in NoSQL, but again, it doesn't replace what exists today, and it's just bringing more headache to new era of data to the existing or the old or current type of data. So the chaos is just getting bigger and bigger. I just wanted to show you another example. This is a great use case where the customer just called up and say, I have a report. I need to see the first name and the last name of my customer. For some reason, I see only the first name. What happened? But you can see very easily we could trace the lineage inside the reporting system showing that there is no such field in the source system called full name. It's actually calculated column that is based on two data elements called first name and last name. And this was a disconnect between the data scientists, the analysts, and the business users to the BI and to the data source managers. So they can get lost trying to figure out where the hell is the full name data element. How can we not find it? Oh, it's being generated somewhere. All right, so let's try to find it. And NoSQL is just bringing more and more chaos to the game.
That's exactly right. Folks, we have a whole ton of very, very specific questions. For a lot of these, I'm going to probably pass them off to the folks at Octopi so they can answer them. There's one fairly general question, David. I think you probably have a pretty good answer to this one. One of the attendees is asking about training and about learning to use these kinds of tools and learn how to manage these complex environments. You've got some fun training things coming up, right?
Yeah, we've got a lot of training things coming up. The Eckerson Group, we're working right now in the late stages of getting ready for a seminar 15 through 17 April in the Chicago area that tackles two tracks. One is more a data science track with Dr. Dion Larson, who is one of the best in that space. The other track will have me doing a series of 3 days of classes on data management, modernization, and cloud migration. Interest in those, just go to eckerson.com/seminars, and you can find more information about the seminar. Training in general, I think using this tool is going to be almost intuitive once you're well trained in the issues of data management. So if you have a good sense of what are the challenges of data governance, what are the challenges of data integration, what are the challenges of data architecture, what are the challenges of modernization, the understanding of the need for metadata, the understanding of the need for good, solid information about your data and how it moves is going to be inherent in that understanding. So the need for metadata will be obvious to you, and the tool. I'm impressed with the degree to which Octopi has put together very intuitive user interface and very comfortable user experience. So I'd say if you get the training in the basic concepts of data management, the need for specific tool training will be minimal.
Okay, good. That's good. And I'll throw one more question at you, because we've talked a little bit about data catalogs, and Amnon was mentioning that a lot of times people kind of think data catalogs and a tool like this are doing the same thing. And to me, this is really a great complement to a data catalog, meaning you can use a technology like this to determine how you're going to structure your data catalog and what data you will start importing into the catalog. And then ultimately the catalog becomes the sort of front end for the data for users, but this is handling the sort of networking underneath, or the management of the ETL, the data movement underneath. Can you talk about how a tech like this would be complementary to a data catalog?
I think they're absolutely complementary. They do very different things. If a data catalogs came about as a part of the self-service movement, where first along came Tableau and Click and tools like that. Okay, you can do your self-service analysis. Okay, but I need to prepare the data for analysis. So then we got the self-service data preparation tools. Okay, now I've got self-service data prep and self-service analysis, but I still need to find and understand the data before I prepare it and analyze it. And that's the goal of a data catalog, is to present to that business user, that data consumer, the data that's out there available to them and the knowledge that we have about that data. For that data to be out there and to be available to them, take some technical people working perhaps in the background or under the hood to make the data move, to get it to the right places, to ensure that it has quality, to do all of the things that we do as data managers. This is the tool for those people. So this is a poor analogy, but maybe enough to make it understandable, is the idea when you're driving your car, the instruments you depend on, the information you depend on, much of it comes from the dashboard of the car and the meters and the gauges on that dashboard. When you take it to the mechanic, he reads the computer codes. And when something needs to be repaired, the mechanic is looking at different data when maintaining and repairing the car than the driver is looking at when driving the car. So the dashboard in the car would be similar to what the self-service data consumer is doing with the data catalog. Octopi would be more similar to what the mechanic is doing when looking under the hood and reading diagnostic codes and so on.
Yep. No, that's a good analogy. I like that. And I'm going to throw one last question over there. I think Amnon is out there still. Here's an interesting comment and a question from an attendee. How do we rationalize the challenge of budgets and pressures of projects that result in no money for training for projects like this? There are so many drivers for a technology like this. Like we've mentioned, there's digital transformation, there's data governance, there's data quality, there's machine learning, for example. If you want to start using machine learning, what do you need? A whole bunch of high-quality data. You need to understand what data is out there in your organization that you're using. So to me, Amnon, just very quickly, there are lots of different drivers. I think the key from your perspective, working with a prospect, is to find their key pain point and then move the messaging around that. Right, Amnon?
Yes, I think that I would be very, very kind of modest. I would say the first reasoning to establish this product was just improve our our quality life. We were kind of anything from embarrassed and pressured because we didn't keep up with the changes that are happening in the business. And what you saw here that could be generated in 5 seconds, sometimes in some use cases took us anything from days to weeks to months. And I was saying enough is enough. So this is how it started, from a very personal pain to improve my quality of life. But then this personal motivation started to be a organization motivation, because there's so many drivers to want to automate yourself. It has to do with the business intelligence efficiency. They talk about regulated areas, which in some cases we work with, regulated companies that need they are using regulated reports and need to be able to prove their control about the data movement process. And here's a great way to do it. So the more automation you get and the more leverage you have by using modern technologies like the one that we're using, anything from algorithm, static analysis, machine learning, that we were recognized by Gartner for that, I think that it not only improves the quality of life of every individual that ends up using this product, but on a macro level, there's a great value to the business, because eventually everybody is in the same game. If the BI is not efficient enough, the business is not efficient enough. And this is what we wanted to solve.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, folks, like I said, we have all these great, very, very detailed questions. I'm going to make sure we get them all over to our presenters today. Big thanks to all of you out there for your time and attention. We know your time is valuable. I think this is fantastic technology. It's coming along just in time to be able to manage some of these incredibly unwieldy environments. And we're going to find it's almost like, this may be a bad analogy, we almost are going to have a sort of crimes against data Me Too movement, where because of this kind of technology, we're finally going to see how much was swept under the rug over years and years and years. And a lot of that is going to be just extraneous nonsense we don't have to worry about, but some of it is going to point to problems that may have been lingering and languishing in organizations for years. So this is cool technology. Be prepared when you start using it, what you're going to find. There's all kind of stuff out there, but unless you know what you've got, you're not going to be able to leverage it effectively. So thanks again for your time and attention, folks. We do archive all these webcasts for later listening. Check back tomorrow to check out the archive of this one. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell. Thanks again, folks. We'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.